just hoping that you'd pick up on that, what that guy said, and say, got nothing to lose.
You gonna ignore me?
No, I don't know you for sure.
Yes, you do.
Ronnie?
No.
No? Victoria? Got it right this time. Hi. Good to see you. Not working today.
Oh, yeah, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm so glad to meet you.
Good.
Hey,
I think
Walter.
Too many stop signs. This one. What are we gonna talk about?
Well, I've got to call this guy Hansen, who's the lawyer that's handling this Bundy case. He's waiting for my call right now. He's supposed to go on the show. We'll see what happens.
All right,
And then you can join the
You
conversation
wanna
if you
join the
like.
conversation?
not about Bundy,
Oh,
no.
he's got such a nice voice.
Oh, no, I don't know about that. I always scare myself when I listen to my recordings.
Oh, I'm so glad to meet you. I didn't think I was gonna be here today.
Hmm.
I had an issue.
Here, secretary, you gonna call him? Or are you afraid to talk on the phone?
Oh, what's gonna give me the number?
Here.
What's his name?
Joel Hansen.
Okay.
3.
That used to be one of my fake names, Hansen.
Oh, is it? You had a fake name?
Yeah, but I didn't want to give a name. Hansen.
Good afternoon, law offices.
Yes, this is Victoria from the Las Vegas Tribune Radio. We were wondering if Mr. Hansen is ready to speak on the radio station.
Which Mr. Hansen? I have two.
Joe.
Joe.
One moment.
Okay, it's all yours.
Tell me what that says.
Where'd you go?
Hello.
Mr. Hansen, this is Clark. I'll be doing Face the Tribune this morning. Would you like to go on the air? We can do it here in about 30 seconds.
Hey.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, I'll be right back with you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I hear you perfect.
Okay. I got you on speakerphone, that's why I asked.
Okay. Good morning, Las Vegas. This is Clark filling in for Rolando on the Face the Tribune today. With us as a special guest, we have Joel Hansen with us to talk a little bit about constitutional law, I think. He's supposed to be very up on that, and he's handling some stuff going on with Clive and Bundy. And we'll see if we can, kind of information he can give us about what's really happening. Good morning, Mr. Hansen. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
How are things going? I understand Mr. Bundy's going to be staying in jail for the rest of his life. He's 69. I don't know how many days he has left, but I guess we'll find out.
Well, if I have anything to do with it, he won't.
Well, that'll be good because we're really confused. We did a show about 4 days ago, and we've had over 400 responses to it with people concerned. And I think you're aware that in front of the courthouse, when there's a hearing going on, there's been over 100 people out there, I guess, on occasion. And there's people that are very concerned. And it may not necessarily go directly to Mr. Bundy himself, but I think this has far more reaching ramifications because I think the government is overreaching. There's something here that stinks. And
That's understated.
right. Right. Well, that's my feeling on the thing, and that's what worries me because who oversees the government or the courts when they're interceding and they're not impartial when it comes to the fact that they're supposedly representing the government? Well, who represents the people when there's a problem with the government overreaching? Who is that? I know we have a tax court that I have some familiarity with, and the judges there give speeches how impartial they're supposed to be because they're funded by Congress and not the this and that and whatever. Whether the taxpayer is really impartial or not may be debatable. But anyways, that's the type of thing we need to oversee the judicial system when they have a tendency to overreach like the government does. The government's run by a bunch of bureaucrats, which are your people. And some of them get an ego, and some of them the power goes to their head. And when Mr. Bundy or whoever, some rancher says, go pound sand for whatever reason, they get a hair, and then the federal agents show up with guns. Isn't that what happened with Mr. Bundy? Wasn't he sitting on his tractor, and a bunch of federal agents showed up with guns?
Well, that's not exactly what happened. I'm not privy to exactly how the militia from around the nation showed up there. I do know that when the federales came there and started rounding up his cattle, that set off a spark, kind of like the shot heard around the world in the American Revolution. It set off a spark, and all those people came, like overnight, because this is an issue. It's not just Cliven Bundy. This is an issue that is going on around the entire western United States, because the BLM and the Forest Service, as far as I can tell, and I think this is true, they have a program, they have a plan to take over and control all of the land, and if you don't act like a serf, do whatever they say, then they kick you out. Now, the BLM has destroyed all of the ranching that ever happened in Clark County except for Cliven Bundy, because they raised the fees and they tightened their regulations and so on and so forth so much that all the ranchers had to quit business. They had to go out of business because they couldn't make more money than it was costing them to raise the cattle. So they drove every rancher in Clark County out of business except for Cliven, and he said, no, I'm firing you because you're supposed to be here. The intent of the Taylor Grazing Act was to encourage and help farmers and ranchers, especially ranchers, because it's a grazing act. It was the intent of it was to have the BLM and the Forest Service help the ranchers so that the country, the land, the space that we have here would be more productive. That was the original intent. That's the way people thought in the olden days. Let's make the land productive. But now what has happened, and I have a friend who's in the BLM that recently retired. I won't quote who it is, but he said, well, you used to have to have a geology degree or a degree in forestry or a degree in, range management or some other like solid type of degree like that to really qualify to be in the BLM. And he said the problem now is that all of these people come in here, and what the degrees they're getting in are in wildlife preservation and other green type of degrees, and so their whole orientation is they're not trying to make it easier for the ranchers to raise more cattle. They're trying to, allegedly at least, trying to preserve the land in a pristine condition, and they're treating it like man is an intruder on the land, an intruder on the earth, and we have to save. And the tortoises are more important than having beef to eat for the people. So we got to save the tortoises, and that's the excuse that they were using to throw all the ranchers off of the land, and that's the reason that they told Cliven that he had to get out of there, because the tortoises were allegedly suffering from the ranching operation. And what's ridiculous about that is that the tortoises studies have shown that the tortoises do better when there's ranching. And it's a funny thing why, but the tortoises love to eat cow pies. That's what they eat. And the more of those there are, the more tortoises there are. It's not bad for the tortoises. maybe once in a while a cow will step on a tortoise's back, but those things are pretty hard. I don't know that it bothers them at all, and it helps the tortoises. So
You don't suppose that's why the tortoises live to be 150 years old, do you? Because of their diet?
well, I tell you what, it's got to be very nutritious. It's a half digested, and there's a lot of good.
All the bad things have been already taken out.
Yeah, nutrition.
Right. Well, anyways, this is
it's kind of like the same diet that the government would like to feed us.
Yeah, there you go. Geez, that's a good point. Anyways, there's the what we're talking about. And I think that when Bundy was on 2 years ago, when all this was going on, he did a little bit of a circuit. He went on some national shows, and it became that he was doing pretty good there and getting a lot of exposure. And then the government or whoever started floating the proposition, well, he's just someone who's not paying his rent. And then the reputation started taking a nosedive because all these other people that don't really know what's going on said, well, he's just not paying his rent. Is any of that involved with the land that we're talking about? Does he own the land, and we're talking about regulations the government's trying to put on his land, or was he actually using federal land, let's say, that all of a sudden they tried to charge rent for using federal land for the grazing, or what's going on here?
Well, that's a real good question, and it's got a long answer, and I'll try not to be too long, but the issue boils down to this, and then I'll go back and explain a little bit. The state of Nevada in the 70s passed what's known as the Sagebrush Rebellion. And in that act, they went on for 2 pages about why it was like a resolution, not really a law on that part of it. It says, these are all the reasons why Nevada should own and control the public land in our state. And then they lay it all out. And it's very persuasive. So then a couple of sections later, they say specifically that Nevada owns all of the public land in Nevada. The state of Nevada is the owner of that. Well, that obviously contradicts what the federal government says, because they say they own almost 90% of the land here. So what that means is that, and they said to Nevada, you have to renounce. When we came into the union, they said you have to renounce any claim to the public land. That's all going to belong to the federal government. And of course, the legislature then was this territorial legislature, and they said, okay. The people that were running the territory at the time said, that's fine, we'll renounce any claim we have to the public land, because they wanted to come into the union. And it was similar in many of the western states. I'm not familiar with the exact history, but if you look at a map of the western states, I don't know that you've seen that, but I have one, and it shows all the red areas in the western states showing that what's owned by the federal government or claimed by the federal government. It's probably an average of 50% of every state, starting with the Rocky Mountain states over to the West Coast, is owned or claimed at least to be owned by the federal government. And it's, if you look, and it's what's so striking is all the land east of that. There's very little federal land. It's just we're like a bunch of stepchildren, the western states, and especially Nevada, because let me go back a minute with a little history. The Northwest Ordinance was passed. I think it was I'm sure it was passed before the U.S. Constitution. The Congress, before the Constitution, underneath the Articles of Confederation, passed the Northwest Ordinance, and it said that this is an oversimplification certainly, but when the new states come into the Union that aren't in the Union yet, that they're the land will be transferred over to them, the public land. And the states in the east, like Virginia and the other eastern states that were the 13 original states, they had land claims going way out into the west. Like, for instance, the first governor of Illinois was Patrick Henry, because Virginia claimed what's now Illinois. And so they gave up all that land out there, and they said, okay, well, we really don't have any control over that, so we're going to cede it to the federal government. And the federal government used that land. They sold it to private people after they came into the Union, and they used that to pay off the war debt, so that the United States wasn't in debt forever. And then the part that wasn't sold was ceded over to the states. So there's almost no federal land in those federal states. And the Constitution says that the federal government is only supposed to own land in the states for the purposes of roads and post offices and military bases and so on, things like that they need to have, which is fine. I'm not against that. I'm not against having Nellis here. That's fine. We need to defend the country, and we need to have roads. We need to have post offices and so on. That's what the founding fathers envisioned, but they never envisioned that the federal government would own up to 90% of the land in the western states. That was nowhere in their thinking. And now they do. Now, of course, the federal government, people will say, well, but that was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War, and the Mexican government ceded to the United States government all this land, which they at the time, Spain had originally owned it by conquest or by discovery, and then that was transferred over to Mexico when Mexico became independent. And then when we defeated Mexico in that war, then they transferred it to us, to the U.S. So the U.S. says, well, we own that land. We own that land, and so we're going to keep it. We're not going to transfer it over. Well, that's not the way things were all up till then. But of course, the thinking changed, and these states they're not really important. We're just going to keep the land, and we'll be the ones that dictate everything that goes on out there. So that's the history of it. But there are Supreme Court cases that say that the territorial legislature cannot bind the state legislature, which comes into existence after the territory dissolves, after it ends. So there was a case down in Oklahoma where the territorial legislature agreed that the capital of Oklahoma would stay in, I don't know which state, in one of the cities down there, and they agreed, we will never change that location of the capital. That's what the territory people said. So when they came into the Union, then the state legislature said, well, we're going to change it over to, what is the capital? Can you tell me, is it Tulsa or?
Of Oklahoma?
I don't know. But anyway, wherever the capital is now, the state legislature
Oklahoma
changed it over
City?
to that.
City.
And so there was a big lawsuit by the people in the first city that said, no, you can't take that away from us because, that's economically valuable. And they went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, you can't, the territory can't bind the state. And so
Well, that's a binding
the same way
precedent
we
then.
are, and the state legislature in Nevada has rescinded the agreement that the state of Nevada, the territory of Nevada, made with the feds when they came into the Union, saying we don't claim the public land, that we cede it forever. Well, the state of Nevada said, well, that was under duress, and we're gonna rescind that. And that was part of the Sagebrush Rebellion. They rescinded it. So then now along comes Cliven Bundy, and his ancestors have been ranching that land out there for almost 150 years. They started out in the 1870s. And they've been there forever, and they're supposed to be recognized, their rights, their preemptive rights to use the land for grazing and for watering are legally, they're supposed to be recognized. They have this land, and they own the right to land. Maybe they don't own the dirt itself, but they own the right to use the land.
How is that given?
through state law.
So there's no title.
No, it's just the law that, if you use the land, you use the grazing, the grass and the brush and whatever else, rights to it by
Play on that after you've used it for 20 years.
the government,
Right.
but and they are there by law, and they're not supposed to be taken away. But the federal government comes and says, well, we're going to protect the tortoises now, so you can only have so many cows out, and the
Okay,
rancher
and
goes
has
out there
that been
because
litigated?
live on that many cows. So
Has Clive and Bundy ever litigated that, or has there ever been a decision on?
the answer to that is true. And he went to federal court at least twice. The court said no. The BLM owns that land, and they said to get the cows out of there, so you have to.
Does the BLM usurp what we talked about the rights to graze and water? How did they usurp that? Who came first?
Cliven did, his ancestors.
Right. So how did they usurp the fact that he had a given right over the years, that what he was doing, he had been doing, and his ancestors had been doing?
Well, that's the problem, is that they
Right.
say, well, there's a case from, I think it's Colorado or New Mexico, the Kleppe case, that says, well, the federal government owns that land, and they can do basically what they want, and they don't have to respect the rights of the people that are there. You just have like a license, and they can revoke that license whenever they want to. So they basically overturned all that and made it so that the federal government has basically full control over it. And so that's why they were able to kick Cliven off.
Okay, so the
I don't
rights
have a
originally
brief
came.
ready on this for you.
Right, the
And
rights
I really haven't had to litigate that particular issue
Yeah.
yet, but I'm working on it. And essentially what Cliven has done is that he said, I'm going to obey the laws of the state of Nevada, because I think that Nevada, given the history here and so on that I've explained, that Nevada ought to own this land, and in fact it does own the land, and the state of Nevada has never come to me and said, you have to stop ranching out here. It's part of our culture in Nevada to ranch, and there's never been a state order to get off. In fact, Cliven went down to the sheriff of Clark County in the very beginning of this controversy and paid $6,000 in grazing fees to the county of Clark, and they accepted the money. He said, "I'm not paying the BLM anymore. I'm paying the Clark County, which is the governmental entity, the closest local entity that there is here, and so I'll pay the fees to you."
Had he been paying the BLM?
I don't think he. Well, yeah, he did. He did before they made it so that it was impossible for him to make a living out there, and then he said, "I'm finished with this." But he did pay some grazing fees to the county of Clark. I'm sure that he paid grazing fees because this all has come up in the last 20 years. They had this fight, so he said, "I'm not going to pay you these fees anymore." So he must have been paying them before, because they never tried to kick him off before. And when he stopped paying them, they said, "Well, you're out of here." So he went and paid it to the county of Clark, and the county of Clark accepted his money. And then a little while later, they said, "Oh, wait a minute." So they cut a check from the county and sent it back to him and said, "No, we can't accept this." So the county of Clark didn't help the situation any. But the point is that
Well, the point is that Clive and Bundy tried to do something that was right.
he tried to pay the
Yeah.
grazing fees to the entity that he thought should get them.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that. At least he wasn't just, saying all of you go away. It's my land now. He wasn't doing that.
And that's not we're not claiming that it is land. We're claiming that it's Nevada's land, and that he has rights in there. And of course, he does have an area around his house there, which is private. And but the vast majority of the land that the cattle graze on is, claimed by the BLM. So the issue is going to be in the criminal case. One of the issues is going to be that under the laws of the United States, that Nevada should own the land, and not the BLM or not the federal government. And we're going to put that forward very forcefully. There are a lot of different theories. One of the theories is the equal footing doctrine. There are several others, but I'll just discuss that one here. The equal footing doctrine was in the Northwest Ordinance that I talked about earlier, that controlled what was supposed to happen when the states came in. And when they say Northwest, they meant the states that were northwest of the eastern seaboard states, like Illinois and those states up in there. So the equal footing doctrines was in that act. The Northwest Ordinance said that all of the new states that come into the Union are supposed to come into the Union on an equal footing with all the rest of the states. So they did, up until they got to the Rocky Mountains, and then they said, well, we're going to keep the land, and so the states out here in the West didn't get to keep their land. Large portions of the land there was kept by the federal government. It was held back. So the theory is, well, we didn't get to come in on an equal footing. You treated us like a territory still. Nevada is basically a territory, not a state, because 90% of our land is claimed and owned and managed by the federal government. So we're 10% of a state. Now, we do have, senators and so on in Washington, but as far as the control of the land in the state, we're a territory. And many of the other western states are in whatever percentage they have of the same situation. Large tracts of land are claimed to be owned by the feds. So, we're saying that's not right. That's illegal. And under the Article 1, Clause 18 of the Constitution, like I said before, Congress and the federal government are given the right to own land within the states, but it's very limited. And in the original Constitutional Convention, one of the delegates said, we've got to do something about this, because we don't want the federal government to own all the land in the state, because if they do, then they will overawe the state into obedience to their edicts. So they limited the ability of the federal government to own land in the states by what I've said.
As it should be. That was the intent, I think, of the Constitution, was to limit the federal government, and what they didn't limit, by for whatever reason, belonged to the states. That's the way I've always understood it.
The 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the United States government by the Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people. And they never delegated the power to continuously own land within the states, except for those limited exceptions, like I said, for post roads and so on.
Right, so it sounds contrary to me, the intent of the Constitution. What's going on here? If we're not a state, how the hell did that happen?
Well, it happened originally because of the Treaty of Guadalupe. Like I said, the federal government did have the ownership of the land in the beginning. They did. Nobody disputes that. But if you look, because they won it in the war, so they won it by conquest, which is,
What year are we going to? What year is this?
If you win something by conquest, then you own it.
Right. What year was this?
at the end of the Mexican-American War in the late 1800s.
So it was after the Constitution. So that was a
100 years
conquest.
later.
Yeah, that was a conquest after. Yeah, okay, I understand that. So that's
And Mexico claimed most of the western United States. But take a look at this. The Louisiana Purchase, okay? The federal government bought the land from France, right? For
Right.
it was $7 million or $15 million, I think. And okay, they bought the land. And now, if you look on the map where the Louisiana Purchase is, it basically ends at the Rocky Mountains. It goes up toward the northwest, but the western edge of the lower part of the Louisiana Purchase is basically at the Rocky Mountains. And if you look at the map, all those states between the Mississippi and the Rockies, they're not owned by the federal government. There's very little land that's federal in there because they follow the original intent of the founders, and the people, private people in the states ended up owning the land. But whatever happened in Washington, I don't know who the bureaucrats or who the senators and so on, or the governor or the president, was there at the time, but they decided they weren't going to do that anymore. So they just basically stuck it to the western states. When we came in, they said, you gotta give this up. So that's what happened. And so the problem is, here's the problem. You said, well, what's going on here? Because who's making these decisions? Who represents the people? And as you know, the judges are supposed to be neutral arbiters. They're supposed to, basis of due process of law is that the judge doesn't have a dog in the fight, right?
well, that's the way it's supposed to be, but
It's supposed to be neutral. You don't want to go before a judge.
it has to be neutral, is my opinion.
Something that's got something to gain by the ruling going one way or the other.
It has to be neutral, or it doesn't have any integrity.
Yeah. Well, the problem here is this: the judges, although they're supposed to be neutral, they're paid by Congress. Their pay comes from the federal government, okay? And furthermore, the thinking in the legal profession and in the country in general has been more toward, giving more power to the federal government for as long as you or I can remember. It's been that way since World War II or before. And so we have a mindset in America that's, it's okay for the federal government to do this. And that is wrong. And a lot of that happened after the Civil War. The states were in trouble because they rebelled and so on and so forth. And much of the power that the federal government has now was transferred to it after the Civil War, because they said, well, the states can't be trusted anymore, so we're going to do it. So
According to them.
since the time of the Civil War. But the question is this: if you read the Federalist Papers, it says in there, and that's, you know what that is, that's what the Madison and Hamilton and Jay wrote in their defense of the Constitution and why it should be adopted. That was their legal brief to the people as to why they should vote the Constitution in. The states should vote it in. And it was said in there that one of we always talk about checks and balances in the Constitution. The president appoints the judges, but they have to be confirmed by the Senate, and then the Senate and the House of Representatives pass laws, but the president can veto the law. So that's a check and balance. And then if the president signs the law into law, and somebody brings a lawsuit and says, I don't think this is constitutional, I think this violates the Constitution. For instance, if they pass the law saying that, nobody can be a Catholic anymore, or, some ridiculous law like that, the judges are supposed to declare that law to be unconstitutional because under the First Amendment, government has no power to do such a thing. And that's what the judges are for. They're supposed to be there to make sure that the federal government stays in check, that the Constitution, here's the quote from Jefferson, "In questions of power, then, speak to me not of confidence in men, but bind them down for mischief with the chains of the Constitution." And the chains of the Constitution are supposed to be put on the federal government by the judges. And if they don't, if they shrug off that responsibility, then, and they say, well, we're going to be, on the side of the federal government here, then there's no chains anymore. Now, what I was about to say, though, I got off on that other discussion, but in the constitutional, the Federalist Papers is what I'm trying to remember, say here. In the Federalist Papers, it was argued, I don't know which one, whether it was Hamilton or Madison, but what they said was that not only do we have checks and balances within the government itself, but we have checks and balances in the system of federalism that we're setting up, because you'll have a state government and you'll have a federal government. And if the federal government is taking and trying to take away your rights and do bad stuff to you, basically, then you can seek redress with the state government. You go to the state and you say, hey, they're taking away my rights. You should do something. And vice versa. If the state is taking away your rights, then you should be able to go to the federal government and say, wait a minute, they can't do this. Well, that's not the way it's turned out, because the only place you can go for any relief is to federal court. If the federal government's doing something you don't like, you can sue them in state court, but then they have the right to remove it immediately in the federal court. So you're always in the federal system. And, pardon me, judges, and there are many great, wonderful federal judges that I respect, but in general, they seem to favor the federal government. And that's what you were complaining about in the beginning, is that the federal judges, you're not supposed to consider them to be the federal government. They're supposed to be, a bar or a block or a protector between the people and the government, which means the president and the executive department and the Congress, and then all these permanent bureaucrats that once they get in there, they're in there their whole lives. They're really the government, is the bureaucrats. And they need to be held in check, and they're not being held in check. The BLM, as you said, was heavy-handed out there, and they came in there with their guns, and now, of course, you know what's going on. That when the people said, well, we have a Second Amendment right to have our guns here, so we're going to exercise that right, and we're going to stand up and say, no, you can't do this to Cliven Bundy. Now all of them are being prosecuted by the the Department of Justice, the federal prosecutors. They're being prosecuted for having done that, for having stood there and said, no, you can't do this. So, unfortunately, they've all been charged with numerous felonies and conspiracies to commit felonies, and that's what Cliven and all the rest of them are facing here, is a whole boatload of charges of obstruction of a federal officer in his duty, and extortion, and closing down federal roads with force and violence, and so on and so forth. But, I'm familiar with what happened out there at the standoff, and they're charging all these people, the cowboys and so on that were out there, they're charging them with violence. They say they were violently resisting the federal officers. But if you understand what happened out there at the standoff, the only people who committed any violence were were the federal officers.
Yeah.
They took Margaret Bundy. She's married, so it's Cliven's sister, Margaret, who is, she's probably in her 60s. They took her and threw her violently to the ground because they didn't like what she was saying. And then the son, Davy, was over. This is before the standoff. Actually, the parties were in opposition to each other. This is in the very beginning of what was going on, and he was out on a county road, and he had his iPad, and he was taking a video of what the BLM officers were doing. And they said to him, "Stop that video. We don't want you. You can't take pictures or videos of us. Stop it." And he said, "Pardon me, but I'm on county land." In other words, state land. County is a creature of the state. I'm on county road here, and I have a First Amendment right to have this camera in my hand and take pictures. So they came over to him. They took away his iPad. They threw him to the ground, and they stomped on the back of his head. They handcuffed him and took him to the Henderson jail and left him there overnight. And then they released him, and as far as I can tell, the records have been, all the records of him being there have been erased.
Oh.
There's no record that they did that in the.
What a surprise!
So, and then the other thing that happened was Ammon, who was one of the boys. I'm sure you've heard his name on the radio reports and so on. They tased him twice. And being tased is not a pleasant experience. It's horrible. You're paralyzed by the electric shock. Now, that's the only violence. The actual violence that happened out there was only committed by the BLM officers and their private army, whoever those people were. And they're saying that the cowboys put the federal officers in fear because they had snipers up on the bridge and so on. Well, there were a lot more snipers up on the ridge above the standoff that were with the BLM. It had a whole lot of snipers up there pointing their guns at the private citizens who were simply standing up for what they consider to be their constitutional rights. So it's a very unfortunate situation that they consider what people out there did to be felonies, and they're attempting to, impose prison sentences on those cowboys.
What is the
In jail the rest of their
criminal? What is the criminal charge that they
So they're
did?
going to try to give them life imprisonment. I don't know that they'll succeed at that, and I think that our best hope is with the juries, because I don't think the judges are going to ever rule that Nevada owns that land, not the federal judges. They are going to say, "Oh, no, BLM and the federal government own that land." I'm sure that's what they'll do. That's what they've done in every case so far. Oh, I've got another thing to tell you. When the law was passed, and I'm talking about the Sagebrush Rebellion law that says we own the land, Nevada owns the land, the Attorney General, who happened to be Frankie Sue Del Papa at the time, she was instructed that she was supposed to enforce that law. Enforce it. So then the issue came up in the federal court regarding the issue of who owns the land in Nevada, or the feds of the state, came up in a case up in Tonopah, and Frankie Sue Del Papa went into the case, and she agreed, in other words, that the law of Nevada was unconstitutional because Nevada can't pass a law and say that it owns federal lands. And so she just said I'm stipulating that that's unconstitutional law here. So, and that's the only case where that law, the state law, has been challenged or ruled on it by a federal judge. And so, you know, the federales, the Department of Justice attorneys, they say, well, that's been decided already. The federal court decided it. Well, I'm sorry, but that case was not litigated. The Attorney General of Nevada went against her instruction, exceeded her authority. She only had the authority to enforce the law, not to stipulate it away. And so the case, that issue's never been litigated yet in federal court. That whether or not the Sagebrush Rebellion law is unconstitutional has not been litigated. And so we're going to litigate it again on that basis. Say, well, this is what Cliven Bundy was doing. He was obeying the law. No, he wasn't. He was a lawbreaker. No, he was obeying the laws of the state of Nevada. Well, he can't do that. Well, he did. Now, there's another interesting twist to this. You know, a person has to have intent to commit a crime. Most everybody understands that. If you commit a crime while you're sleepwalking, it's not a crime because you didn't have any intent to commit the crime. Or if you're insane, you can't form the intent to kill anybody because you're not in your right mind for whatever reason. Or if you're unconscious for any reason, you do it, without any intent, then it's not a crime. Well, did Cliven Bundy intend to break the law? You tell me.
All right, my question was, what crime did he commit? What did he do?
Well, he didn't do anything. He stayed in his house. He wasn't involved in the confrontation. Now, what they're saying is that he was a part of the conspiracy to do that. In other words, he sat around and talked about it, and they agreed that they would go out and be violent against the federal authorities. But that remains to be proven by them.
Right, and it's their language. They're stretching it. They're spinning it. They're to get their way to keep him in jail, I guess. Now they're kind of morphing this situation into where they may not be able to get anything on keeping him in jail. So now they're saying, well, he's a threat not to show up for the next hearing. So that's why they're keeping him in jail.
Well, that's pre-trial. And that's right. I represented Cliven in the hearing as to whether or not he could be released pending the trial. And I showed the court here 33 letters from friends and neighbors and family saying Cliven Bundy is a law-abiding citizen. He's never hurt anybody. He's never, shot anybody. He doesn't have any criminal record whatsoever, except maybe a parking ticket. And there's no reason that he's going to run away and try to hide somewhere, because he's been out ever since the standoff. He's been openly flying on airplanes around the country. There's a lot of people that have asked him to come and speak, and there were plenty of times that they could have arrested him. Like they say, well, he's going to have a big militia around him if we try to arrest him again. Well, they never tried to arrest him when they could have arrested him. He went on airplanes all the time. When you go through the scanner in the airport, you don't have anybody there to protect. You don't have a gun. You don't have anything. And that's where they arrested him up in Oregon, of course. But they could have done that for 22 months, and they never did it. So, and then he always came home. So what? He's not going to run away. Where would he go? And he's an old man. He's 69. I can't say that I'm older than he is, but he's not like some young buck that's going to go to Mexico or something. He's got family. He's got hundreds of relatives. I think he and his wife and his first wife and his second wife together have 14 children, and they're all around here. Many of them live around in Bunkerville or here in Las Vegas. And his livelihood is on that ranch. He's not going to go anywhere. And that's the argument I made to the judge. The issue is he a danger to the community? Is he going to go and do violence against anybody in the community, number one? And number two, is he a flight risk? Well, there's no evidence that Cliven Bundy has ever hurt anybody, including the federal officers. He's a law-abiding citizen who's never hurt a fly. And secondly, he's not a flight risk. Well, the judge said, yeah, but he hasn't obeyed those two prior orders of the federal judges before me to get his cows off the land, so I can't be sure that he's not going to disobey my order that he has.
Boy, is that a stretch, I'll tell you what.
That was his thinking, and then then besides that, he was involved in this conspiracy to commit violence on these federal officers.
Another stretch.
So I can't let him out. I'm going to leave him in jail until the trial and beyond if he gets convicted. So that was I'm telling you, I argued with all the passion that's in me about that to the judge. This man isn't a violent man. He's a law-abiding man.
Right.
And I've known him for years. He's a friend of mine, and he's never committed any violence on anybody. He was just standing up for his rights out there. Well, at least the Cowboys were standing up for his rights. And they didn't hurt anybody. They didn't hurt anybody. Nobody got shot. Nobody got hit. None of those Cowboys took a gun and, like you see in the movies, they take their pistol and hit the guy on the back of the head and knock him out. None of that happened. And as far as I know, Cliven never even had a gun on him during the entire time. He never walked around armed. He mostly just stayed in his house. He was out among the people at some of their meetings and so on, but when the confrontation took place, he wasn't there. So he didn't do any violence to anybody or even threaten any violence.
My opinion is there's better fights the government can pick than this one. Why are they picking this one? Is there an agenda that's hidden here that we don't know about yet? Or has some bureaucrat made a mistake with his ego and he's gone too far and now he won't admit it, so he's going to go further and further? Or what is going on, and what's the solution to this mess? Because you're right, there's no business for that guy to be in jail is what I'm upset about. And if he's in jail, how come we're not all in jail? And this has gone too far. This is an overreach.
I don't disagree with anything you've just said, except you asked me a question. Is there a hidden agenda here? No, there's not a hidden agenda. There's a very open agenda, and that is this. There is, if people all over the western United States, and even farther than that, some of the people were from back east that came, that showed up there and were engaged in the confrontation with the federal officers, if you get that kind of reaction and hundreds of people come and take their lives into their hands and stand up against these federal officers, the one what's his name, the man up in Oregon that got shot,
Finnegan, yeah.
Yeah, he took his life in his hands, and he was murdered by the federal officers. So all of them down there, they knew the risk, and they came there. Why? But why was that? Why was that outpouring like that? I'll tell you why. Because people all around the western United States are angry. They're upset. They feel the same way Cliven does. You guys are controlling us. You are making it so it's so difficult to make a living. Nobody wants to ranch anymore, or you're closing all the forests to save the spotted owl, and we can't do our lumbering anymore. You are destroying our livelihood, and in the meantime, destroying our freedom by all of these actions that your bureaucrats are taking to take control of the western lands and kick off the inhabitants or take away their ability to use it for anything. You remember the story of Robin Hood?
Yeah.
What could the people go out and hunt in the forest?
No.
Why?
Because the king wanted it all.
The king said, I own the forest. You can't use it. You
Right.
can't hunt in there. You can't do anything. That's the way it's becoming now. The king King Congress and the King bureaucrats are saying, you can only use this land by our leave. And they're going around the state of Nevada and buying up all of the unused mineral claims, and they're trying to get as much as the water in Nevada as they can. What's the purpose of it is to enclose us all in the cities and not have, not be able to go out and go hunting, or not be able to use the land for cattle, and not be able to use it for mining and so on. They're I don't know that that's a hidden agenda of everybody in the government, but it seems to be pretty open to me of a lot of the bureaucrats, because they're, like I said in the beginning, their education is in environmental science. The enviros, they think that mankind is an intruder on the planet and should never hurt a fly, or should never kill an animal, or should never plow up the land because you might hurt a mole, or should never plow up the land because that destroys the original pristine soil, and we don't want you to be doing that anymore. We want to preserve this in its original state. Well, of course, that destroys the ability of mankind. The purpose that God created the earth was to put mankind on the earth and make it so that mankind could have a living, could raise food, and could survive.
Well, there's rumors floating around that the BLM is a foreign corporation.
Well, I don't know anything about that.
Okay, well, that's a pretty extensive one. We've heard a lot about it in the last few days. That's just going around. I don't know about it either, but you can go online. There's a lot of information on there about that, but who's putting the information on there, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. I tend to disbelieve those rumors, but could be. I think they're an agent.
You kind of follow the money's always been my thing. That gives you the answer to a lot of things in life. Follow the money. Well, if there's a private corporation or a foreign corporation involved, that has something to do with money and mineral rights and this and that come into play. So that may be the hidden motive. But also, I understand exactly what you just said about these, land lovers and so forth, and the EPA and everything. That's another issue that's very, very anti, if you will, living issue to me. I mean, that's a good possibility that you get these people that just have an agenda. And
their agenda is to the extreme environmentalists, who I think in large part have taken over the BLM and the Forest Service. Their object is to stop the development of the land by people. I've got a client up in Wyoming, and he knows where there's a huge gold deposit up there. And he's tried everything he can to try to get through the bureaucrats at the BLM to say, okay, I want to mine this gold out of here, this great treasure that's in the ground that I've discovered. He's never been able to get the permits. They put him off, and they delay, and they put this requirement in and that requirement in, and he's been working on it for like 10 years, and he can never get the permit. There's always something that's not done yet. So that's a mining issue. You can't. Why did God put the gold in the ground? Why did He create the earth and give us all these resources if He didn't want us to use them? I mean, and that's the viewpoint of people who believe in God and believe that God created us and put us here on the earth and said to Adam and Eve, "Now take care of the Garden of Eden," and gave us the right to develop the land for our use. And that was always the mindset of the people of the United States up until probably the last 50 years. And then we have all these environmentalists telling us, "Oh, you can't touch the land. You might hurt a snail darter fish. You can't." They shut down the warm springs out there, north of Nevada. And it was a beautiful place to go and with your family and have a nice day in the hot springs out there. And they came in and shut it down because they were going to. It was hurting the pupfish that were in the water out there. I was involved in that case a long time ago.
Wow.
And so what happened? I have to tell you this little aside here. what happened was, the Mormon Church had a place across the street from that resort that they closed down, and they closed it down because they were saying that the use of it by people was killing the pupfish, and so what happened was they closed it down and they didn't let anybody swim in there anymore. So but what happened was that there ended up being way more pupfish over in the Mormon place where they had the swimming pools over there than there were in where the government was taking care of. So they really did a good job there. They fenced us out of that very nice place to go and have a day with your family, and so they had to save the pupfish, and then it turns out that they didn't save any pupfish. Wrecked the pupfish because of what they did. So that's the kind of thing they say they're protecting the land, but you know what? Ultimately, I think the question is a matter of an excuse. They have to have an excuse to take over the land, so they use the pupfish and the tortoises.
It's like global warming is a redistribution scheme,
Yeah, we have global warming, so the United States has to stop cars.
Right. Well, anyways, getting back to Bundy a little bit here in this issue, we've been talking about a lot of controversies and division and so forth. This is my point, is why is a man in jail? Because we have some vital issues here that somebody needs to decide, and it's an issue between the state and the federal governments and so forth, and they're using this man because he appears to be a name that they can, I guess, use and abuse and try to get some point across somehow, but it's all specious. This is not legal. This is the government's overreaching and doing illegal things. Way worse, the Bundy hasn't done anything illegal. The government's doing the illegalities.
My position is he hasn't done anything legal because it's illegal for the government to claim Nevada's land.
Exactly, I understand.
So they're the criminals. They're the ones that committed violence out there.
Yep.
I like to. And this was instead of being the Battle of Bunker Hill, it was the Battle of Bunkerville.
Yep, they're very good. Yep.
It really wasn't a battle because there wasn't.
It wasn't a battle. The battle showed up with the people showed up with guns, and the first people that showed up with them were either the BLM or federal agents or whatever they were. That's what started this. Bundy was sitting on his tractor.
Right.
So you got to start where it starts, and that's the issue.
Or his horse.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much. This has been very informative. I appreciate your openness and so forth. I know our listeners do, and like I said, we've had a lot of stuff going on this. And
let me put in a plug here for Cliven.
Okay.
So far I've been volunteering my services on this case, and I've put a lot of time into it. Had to appear in a couple of hearings and write briefs and do research and so on. And but I can't keep going as his attorney. And there's another attorney going to come in and help me on it. His name is, well, I don't know that I'm authorized to say that name yet, so I won't. But I've got another attorney that's coming in and help me. He's a very able attorney. But we can't do it for free. We have to make a living. I've got to put food on my table and pay the mortgage on my building and so on. So what we need is a legal defense fund, and we need contributions so that we can defend Cliven in this case and defend the people of the state of Nevada who should own this land. So I would like to put out a plea to all of your listeners to send a generous donation to my office, and it will go and make the check to the Bundy Defense Fund. And you can contribute $5 or you can contribute $5,000. Whatever amount you can contribute, we would appreciate. And let me give you the address. It's the Bundy Defense Fund, care of Hansen Rasmussen Attorneys, Hansen, and Rasmussen is Rasmussen. So Bundy Defense Fund, care of Hansen and Rasmussen Attorneys. And my address is 1835 Village Center Circle in Las Vegas. I'll repeat that, 1835 Village Center Circle, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89134. And we will put that in our trust account, and we will only use it for purposes of defending Cliven Bundy. It's not going to be used for anything else. It'll be used to pay the lawyers and used to pay the costs, whatever costs we incur in the litigation. I don't believe it's tax deductible, unfortunately, but if the people of the Western United States in particular don't stand up and say, okay, yeah, we've got to help defend Cliven Bundy in this case, then it's just one more step of the loss of our freedom. One more thing with it, we are losing our freedom very rapidly in these days, and if we don't stand up and say, hey, we don't want to do this anymore, we want you to stop taking away our freedom, then we're all going to end up as serfs. We're supposed to be citizens. Citizens are people who are free, and we're not. We're becoming serfs instead of citizens, because if you have to obey somebody all the time and they own all the land and you don't own anything, and everything they let you have is something that they lend to you so that they can make money on you, then you're a serf, just like over in the feudal system in Europe.
Yeah.
So I encourage all of you to who are listening to contribute to Cliven Bundy's Defense Fund so that we can be effective attorneys. And we're opposing the federal government. They got all the money and all the lawyers they want. When I was in court the other day trying to get Cliven released pending trial, about a 2-hour hearing down there, and the government had about 4 lawyers sitting at the desk there, and they had a whole row of people, about 25 people behind them. Some of them were lawyers, some of them were law clerks. They all worked for the prosecutor's office. So it was me, all by myself, against about 30 people who were all intent on keeping Cliven Bundy in jail as long as they can. So
Well, I think this country was founded for we the people, and I go by that. And I think that all the government and everybody else works for us, we the people. So I don't know, and this may be going out of line, but I don't know why a bunch of people, there's 100 people that go out in front of the courthouse sometimes over this issue. Why doesn't 20 or 30 of them just get together, go to the jail where Bundy is, tell the jailer there or whatever, you're going to release Bundy to our custody, we're going to bring him home, and that's where he'll be. If you want to talk to him or anybody, you talk to us, and that's the way it is. We are the people. That's what we're doing. Everybody works for us, and you can stop this overreach. And if you want to settle this in courts, go to court, have your time at it. But Bundy's going to be home.
well, I wish that would work.
Well, okay, we'll try it.
Well,
But I mean, sometimes you have to treat the government the way they treat us. We are the people. And we're done. What do you think this election's all about? Why are they having the turnouts? The government has to wake up. These bureaucrats that think that they're the ones, that they're the elite, they're going to get away with all this. Those days are numbered. I think, I hope.
well, I hope that it goes that direction for us, because if it doesn't, we're going to end up as slaves.
Right, you're right. So anyways, thanks a lot for your time and effort in this. So we're going to, I think I'll replay this show often during the week. I will probably schedule it maybe every Wednesday, for example. And then if you want to do another one at some time, we'll be in touch, and maybe we'll do an update or whatever too. And then I know that we've got a lot of people with activity on this trying to find out what's going on. So we'll relay whatever to them too, and we'll announce in the paper and so forth when we're going to rebroadcast this show. So I think it's important to get that information out there, what's really going on, because information is what's going to save the day, because the government's not going to give it to us. They give us spin.
Well, I want to say one last thing. When the Founding Fathers decided to break away from England, they wrote the Declaration of Independence, and they said at the end of the Declaration, in support of this Declaration, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then they all signed it. Many of them did die, and many of them lost their fortunes in the Revolutionary War. If we're not willing to at least put part of our fortune up to defend our freedom, then we're going to lose it. So we need to have the wonderful people who are listening out there in Radio Land to send those donations in. 1835 Village Center Circle, Las Vegas, 89134. We hope that you will help us so that we can stand up for freedom, stand up for Cliven Bundy, who is being made a martyr. He's being made an example by the government. We're going to show all of you people out there that you can't do this. We're the boss, and you're the slave. And
That's right. Okay.
it's going to be unless we stand up and say no. I'm not advocating violence. I'm advocating that we use our means that we have at our hands and go to court, and then ultimately, of course, this is going to have to be settled in Congress.
Right. In the meantime, Bundy shouldn't be in jail.
In the meantime, he shouldn't be in jail.
Exactly. Okay.
I tried my best to get him out, but I was facing.
Well, we'll go get him.
I'm not going to take a position on that.
Well, I understand that, but what could they do to us if we, the people, we're not breaking the law? We're going to go get a fellow citizen from being interned when he's not guilty of any crime. What's he been guilty of? That he might do something in the future, according to a judge? Since when's that a crime? Well, they may not show up for some hearing or some order. So what? If that was the case, the jails are full now.
All those illegals
Yeah.
that don't show up.
Anyways, thanks again, Mr. Hansen. I appreciate it.
Well, I'd be pleased to do it again if you want to call me. Nothing's really happening right now in his case. We're waiting for future hearings. So
When is the next hearing?
I don't know. There's not one scheduled.
Oh, I thought it was April something,
Well,
or May.
they scheduled the trial, but that's not going to happen.
Oh, right.
The government is going to move to declare the case a complex case because they're going to combine all of the defendants, 19 different people, into one trial, which will make the trial last probably for several months.
Yeah, what's the justification to keep him in jail for that?
I told you.
Well, I understand that, but what's the justification? How do they justify it? They've got to release him. On some principle, he's not guilty of murder, not guilty of anything.
Well, the federal judge takes a different view, as I'm sure you heard me say.
Right. Well, that's the problem, is that judge is not impartial.
Well, I think he probably believes he is, but from my perspective, I think he's probably inclined to favor the government more than he is my client.
There you go. And that's not justification for keeping a man that may be innocent in jail. Just the concept that he may be innocent is enough.
Are you trying to say that a man should be considered to be innocent until...
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. You have a better legal mind than me, so maybe that's the better way to put it.
I don't think it's right to put him in jail, but and I put all the passion and work and blood, sweat, and tears into my brief and my argument that I knew how to do, and it was all for naught because
Right.
when I finished arguing and the government said, "Well, we don't have anything further to add, Your Honor," then he read his decision, which he'd written before the hearing.
Well, exactly. Yep. Okay, I understand. Anyways, I guess you wouldn't oppose about 20 of us going down to wherever he's locked up and just go get him out, would you?
Like I said, I'm not going to take a position on that. As
Okay.
a lawyer, I can never advocate
Right.
violent.
It wouldn't be violent. We wouldn't even have a gun. We're just going to go down there and say, we're the people of this country. Remember us. We the people. Here's the Constitution if you'd like to read about it. And we're taking custody of our fellow citizen. He's not going anywhere. He'll be with us. You want to get a hold of him? Give us a call.
Well, that's pretty radical.
Well, that's what it takes sometimes. The government's becoming radical and radical and radical. And that's the natural progression. Everything goes one way after a while, and you have to stop it. Because you're dealing with people and egos and titles and people that think they have a power, and they abuse their power. And that's where we're at. So we the people cannot abuse our power. We're given our power. It can't be abused. So we're going to go to the jail, and we're going to say, give them to us. See what happens, and of course we'll have all the cameras with us too, and all the stations, and we'll have massive media, and we'll see what they do.
Well,
And it's not civil disobedience, because we're not disobeying anything. There's no law that we're disobeying.
I'm afraid that the officers who are in charge of Mr. Bundy might pull their weapons and start shooting.
That's the question, because what we're talking about may not happen tomorrow or next year or the year after, but eventually, if the government keeps getting out of control, ask the King of France what happened to him in the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And we don't want to go that far. But that's the way it's going, and what stops that?
If we can get the right people into the right president into the White House who will appoint judges, and that's who does it, is the president, who will appoint judges who are of a different bent, different opinion about the relationship between the states and the federal government, we might be able to change things. So
We need to go to the Constitution, and that's our Bible, and that's it. And if it's not by the Constitution, then it doesn't fly.
we should elect people who believe in the Constitution. I'm disappointed because I don't hear any candidate for president ever mention the word the United States Constitution. It's not brought up. And it needs to be.
Well, you see, they're in power. They're in the government, they think. So they don't like the Constitution, if the truth be known, because it restrains them. They don't want any restraints for these pesky little citizens. Who do they think they are?
Tie them down for mischief with a change of the Constitution.
You got it.
All right. It's been nice talking with you.
Thanks, Mr. Hansen.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice to meet you, Walter. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah,
We've been
really.
fighting over this Irish cream since you brought it here.
Yeah. What about it?
We've been fighting over it.
We were fighting about it.